Today I wanted to go through and touch base about bipods. Our last video was about how to set up a rifle for essentially long range precision shooting, and some of the features that we use on rifles to make them work better or worse, and essentially trying to sort out problem rifles. And with that I went into bipods, and it really opened up some questions and the thought that probably there's more information I could share to people to help them make decisions and hopefully make their rifle shoot better. What we've got in front of us is the little Atlas bipod, great little bipods. I should also say I'm not in the job of reviewing products. I'm not in the job of saying a bipod is good or bad, but I'll go through some products, and I'm really not talking about the product itself. I'm talking about the features of it, of a few of my rifles, so you can see where I'm coming from. Essentially, so the little Atlas bipod, nice little bipod, nice and easy to use in the way of the push down to fold up and down legs, tucks away very nicely in either direction for being able to leave the bipod on the rifle and put it in the bag or put it in the safe and all that sort of stuff. It's a nice, these bipods come with a nice simple quick release system. So you put a rail on your rifle, and then a nice simple quick release that sits on there, locks on, has a little lock system. So a very nice feature, and they're quite a nice, in that form, semi-sophisticated bipod. Nice adjust system. Simply pull down this little lever to be able to move it up and down to get your adjustment out of it. And they also have underneath here a lock for your swivel, so you can swivel side to side and lock it up. In what I like about these bipods, I really have these for most rifles. Are a good starting place. They're a nice, simple to use bipod. A rail on the bottom of the rifle, nice and easy to use. You essentially, they work nicely in all the forms that I can on that score. The other positive I like with these bipods is this bit of free play. That bit of free play is a nice thing to shoot with. It means for moderate to even heavy recoiling rifles, you have essentially that action there, that's straightforward and bad action. So you essentially set this bipod up where you've preloaded it. So you put your shoulder behind it, you preloaded it. As it goes bang, you'll see the barrel comes straight back. So nice and neat and tidy, and it allows the rifle to move, the actual, that bit of travel. And listen, in a high recoiling rifle, the rifle will obviously move back another probably inch and a half further than that. But it's the first bit of travel of where we want the rifle to stay dead smooth. And by having that bit of free play means that when you're preloaded, that first bit of movement, the feet don't need to move at all. And essentially that lets the barrel move dead straight backwards onto your shoulder. Obviously depends on what you've got going down here as well, but the job of the bipod is dead straight to give you a very consistent preloaded shot, and a very good way of getting some real accuracy out of it. In a slightly less positive note, you'll notice that they have not that much travel. So you can obviously use your legs and jack it up and down, but they are not as simple as a bipod with more travel to be able to jack it up, getting yourself in position, move it over, and then lock it up. You also find, as much as these do lock up, they're not quite as positive as other forms of locking system, but it still is a locking system, which is better than most bipods, and it does work. One of the features I feel about this style of bipod, which I see as a false positive, as it were, and that is this feature of you can actually run 45 to the rear or 45 to the front. So for the people who really like to tuck down low to the ground, not one of the features I like, but or they're in a shooting position you can use this very low position, that seems to be a great idea, because you've got a really short bipod up to all the way up. I won't put the other leg up, but quite a tall bipod all the way up. So that seems to be a nice feature. There is a little thing about this feature which I don't like. In that position there, in a bench rest situation or shooting off a flat surface with no traction, you can't preload the thing anyway. So another feature that generally bipods without some other feature aren't the best or aren't going to behave the same as in a prone position where you can properly preload the legs, because you can't, especially with this sort of thing on a flat bench, you can only push the weight of the rifle. So essentially it's not as consistent as being able to get those legs properly gripped and then preload. But in this 45-degree situation, to the rear or to the front, you'll see, if you watch when I actually move, when I preload the rifle and then let it come back, you see that's an up and down movement. So that's if you've got an even preload. With this sort of system, if you get a slightly uneven preload where it's actually one leg's gripping more than the other, it'll actually move to the right. You can't see it there, and I won't get too complicated, but the barrel can move right and left in that same situation, simply through the nature of these things. As they pick themselves up, they don't necessarily do it evenly depending on the traction they've got on the front here. So for no preload and no traction on the legs, it works. For any real prone position or where you do have traction and you're trying to preload especially, and of course this problem is all more relevant to the more recoil you have, but that feature there of that up and down the barrel is caused by the position of these legs, and so not a position that I choose to shoot them in. But obviously you have the advantage of being lower down, and if you're not after, if it's only a low recoiling rifle and you're only after 1.5 MOA or that sort of thing for what you're shooting, it does the job fine. But it's a feature to be aware of. And I think that's basically, in the Atlas, what I can talk about. I'll just put this one over here and I'll put back another bipod. This is the Harris bipod. This is on, that other rifle by the way was a 17 Hornet. This is Sam's 223. And this has got the little Harris bipod on it. And essentially the features of the Harris for anyone, and the knockoffs of the Harris, essentially nice, simple, no buttons or anything to press, just nice, simple, pull it down on a spring-loaded system. Nice deploy of the legs in the way of getting them down, so that's nice. They click in nicely. So all the features there, nice and simple. With the S-lever fitted, so you've got, it's a swivel model I should say, which is the only way I would use them, where they would have a swivel, which essentially simply means that you can then got a good amount of rotation to be able to get onto different positions and shoot with it. And I always fit this S lever on the back of it, which means there's a nice, simple, very positive, from loose, rocking around, where it'll fall, to getting on per target and tightening it to where you can really lock it down and make it nice and firm so that it really doesn't want to move at all. And I would say with all bipods, I like the feature of locking. There's a lot of people I see shoot with no locking, so they just have the bipod swiveling around. And listen, it works fine. You know, you keep your eye on everything and keep it all straight and hold it in there, or work out a proper scope picture where you know exactly where you're holding it. Yes, you can do all that and it makes it work without any problems. I find you're doing a lot to get on target at extreme range. You're doing a lot of work with everything else you're trying to read. You're trying to read the wind, you're trying to work out the shot, you're trying to hold in a very, very small target and a very long way away. So I like the ability to lock it in. It means I can check it, but I don't have to fight with it. It's not one of the things I'm trying to balance, I'm trying to do. I can then lock in, I can check my cant on a bubble level, and I can make sure it's good, and I can focus on the shot and my breathing and my preload and everything else, and not have to worrying on that. So that's a personal feature, but I certainly like it, and this is a very good locking feature. The rest of the bipod, they are very economical in the way cost side of things, and their locking on side of things. This is locked on in the very basic nature, where it essentially is on the swivel stud. It hooks on the actual normal sling stud, and then locks down on a little system here. So that's it goes up in here, locks it on tight, nice and simple. So it'll go on any hunting rifle, work really well. A great bipod because of that. One of the features I pointed out last week, which is where this conversation comes from, which is a bit of a negative, is essentially, especially, and this is probably in its absolute worst form, this is a short bipod with the legs closed up, but you'll notice that essentially I can not really get any preload on that bipod. You push it forward, it's going to push over that bump. The moment it goes bang, it's going to skid straight backwards. So shooting in a bench rest form on a smooth top, we don't have any traction anyway, okay, it's probably not going to cause problems. The actual reason I don't like that is that in dirt and situations like that, and actually to do with your whole shooting form, because you can't put proper preload on it, and if you do, your preload is not going to, when you get shoved, everything's got to move. So your legs are going to jump. There isn't the pressure set up on the rifle to be able to help the rifle deal with the harmonics. There's issues because there's no movement, is what I'm actually talking about. This is the little one. If we put its legs all the way up, you'll find that then the mechanical advantage of the longer legs will start to bend that frame a little bit. And you'll see up here, we have a bit of movement out of it. Now obviously, for how you're set up, how you're shooting, you might not always get the ability to be able to, or you've set it up where you've got full legs, you've got to get it down because you haven't got enough height at the back here, you don't put your shoulder way off the ground, or whatever different reasons. But essentially it is a feature that is a slight negative to, especially on high recoiling rifles. Now on this rifle, which like I said is Sam's 223, this works fine. We don't have any issues with it. It's a very low recoiling rifle, it's a 223 with a muzzle brake, and we really don't have any issues on it most of the time. But it is a feature that we have to be aware of, and we have to shoot with Sam. I set it up where she does really like to have this lock working very well. It's a very simple, no fuss bipod, so it works great on that score. But there is this other side of it. Also with the feet, you actually can get spikes for these. There's people who make spikes for them, which in the prone shooting, and there's also spikes and different feet, which I didn't show with the Atlas. I'll just show you from over some other different feet that plug into the Atlas, which are a semi-pad claw style thing to get your grip on dirt and soft ground and things like that. Like I said, you can get spikes for the Harris and for the Atlas as well, which is another good idea in the way of being able to dig into the ground. There lies in that when you don't have any movement out of it, if you get a heavy recoiling gun and a rifle and have spikes on one of these, you can get some pressure going forwards. Backwards, it's going to have to start to action those legs and start to roll the rifle down as well. So it's a feature that, and I suppose as of all the shooting, of all the features I spoke about last week, and is what I'm talking about with the bipod side of things, if the rifle's shooting really well, it's all well and good, leave it alone. It doesn't need touching. But in the world of dealing with problems or picking a bipod or trying to make sense of it, this is information to try and help with that. But essentially that's these are a good little bipod. They work really well, but there is that stiffness of the leg. That feature there is something that I'm not 100% au fait on. The other feature I'd say, which is a noticeable feature to me, and it's more a mechanical feature or an engineering feature that troubles me a tiny bit, is if you look at the side of this directly, you'll see that essentially the angle of this foot is following the angle of the stock. So it's actually running up. Some are even more than that, will have even more angle. For that reason, those legs are pointing forward. So in a mechanical sense, especially when we've got it up in a higher form, that means that I really want to have that directly parallel. With it pointing forward means that the preload I get out of it is going to have a tiny bit of up and down travel. Now there's such a tiny detail, it's really nothing to talk about, and it's one of the features that tends to nag me more. There is a logic that goes with it, but I tend to tie in logic to aesthetics. So if things look right, I'm more comfortable with it. As for how much, I've never actually tested that as to how much of an issue it is, but it's one of the things I'd prefer this to be flat and the bipod legs to be coming straight down. Anyway, I'll grab another rifle and I'll have a look at another bipod and have some more chat about that. And this moves more into what I do in the way I've managed to find myself a bipod that I like the design of. It's very similar to the Seiko bipods that I have on 3 of my rifles. It's very similar in design. It's an aftermarket bipod, and I've also modified it, which I've pretty much done to all the bipods other than the 2 basic ones you just saw. This one I've modified in the fashion of I've changed the feet around a little bit, so this is a 308, it's not a big recoiling gun. I've made it so it's a little more versatile for the areas I shoot. And I've also modified the front here. This was simply a swivelling bipod. I've made it where I've put a lockdown system, so I've still got a good swivel out of the bipod, and I put this lockdown unit in the front to be able to lock it in and make it, like I said, I like to be able to do. This is a style of bipod that push down and you can swing it forward or back to wherever it wants to go to, the way of putting it away. So once again, travels nicely like that, goes in the safe nice like that, doesn't need to come off the rifle. Can come off the rifle if you want to. It unscrews as a bolt that I actually have mounted, both screwed and glued inside the wooden stock. Comes forward with a thread which actually holds it on the front there, which is a little bit of machining to do, and that went in there nice and easily. The feature I like about these is the low centre of gravity. Now, the logic of the low centre of gravity is quite simple. When this is free, this is got a far more inclined, not completely, but far more inclined to sit up straight. It's not trying to fall off something. The weight is fairly low compared to the swivel. So it makes it more naturally balanced on that sort of score. The truth of that is that the way I shoot in a locked up form, it matters very little. It's one of those things that, like I said, aesthetically I like things that mechanically make sense to me and tends to be where I head. But by the locking side of things means it's not a big feature of it. It does work better in the overall weight of the gun, in the way of its balance, both for a couple of features. One, if you look at the width of the spread of these legs, they're very nice and wide. So that gives you a really good wide platform to shoot over, and it's a nice design because of that. The other feature is that same thing I'm talking about in that travel. A little bit of travel in them, which is, some people might think the travel's bad, they want it all locked up. I very much like it. The first part of that shot, that barrel is travelling straight backwards. That's exactly what I want to see. So it's a nice bipod in its overall design, nice to fold away. I like being able to fold up. I like the look of the style of the legs laid back down alongside there to put the thing in the safe or in the gun, in the gun case. I like the look of that. I like the functionality of the legs, and I really like that. I also, as you'll notice, I tend to, it's a bit of a mechanical thing again, but I've shortened the stock so I don't run my legs too far forward. Makes getting forward when you're laying down prone, getting forward to the legs a little easier to do. It also, because I'm pivoting, I have my rails I always modify and build to the back of my stocks. But even without that, you're running a bag or whatever you're running under the back here, your distance to the front, really not sacrificing anything in the way of stability by giving or taking 6 inches from the front here. You've got a stable platform there anyway. But the further your legs go forward, the longer the legs have to be to give you elevation. The further the legs come back, the shorter the legs need to be. And that'll be the other feature of this style of bipod. By having it so high, the leg can go from quite low to quite tall in one extension, rather than having extra extension. It's one of the features of having this leg running from a higher place. So I hope that makes some sense. A little confusing, but essentially it's one of the features I like about mounting it up here. But this bipod is a great bipod. I like the look of the rifle. It becomes a nice looking structure and something I'm very happy with. Change to another bipod and I'll go through that. This is my TRG. Last one, if I didn't say it, was the 308. It's a Remington 700 308. This one is the 338 Lapua in a Seiko TRG. Lots of custom bits and pieces I've done to this rifle. Bipod, not one of them. Have customised it a tiny bit. This is the bipod that comes with it. It actually clicks in into the aluminium chassis these actual rifles run. So the stock covers are really slip-on bits and pieces. There's an aluminium frame that the barrel sits in. Essentially, it slides in the front here. I won't go to the pain of pulling it in and out, but essentially that's how it locates. So it's nice and high, works really well. Most of them don't have this. This is a bit I've modified, where I have another one of my little lock-up points in the front here, which goes from swivel to locked up, in the way I've modified that to give me that lock-up point which I like to have. I'll go through quickly the bit you're looking around. This is just simply some weight I put in the front of the gun. I probably don't need it anymore, but I wanted the gun to be a little bit heavier with what I'd actually set up with how I like to shoot it, with shooting extreme long range and the setup we're running at. So I've left that weight there. It's a feature that gives me a nice balance to the gun and I'm quite happy with. And by the way, weight in the front of the gun, especially when this was jumping to start off with, isn't a terrible place to put it. But I won't go into any more about that at the moment. This is about the bipod. I like this bipod. It's one of the reasons I first bought the rifle was the design of the bipod, how it clicked in, and really my first foray into larger calipers, or going into the 338, which we've done quite a bit of work with. I like the way these fold away. These legs, once again, do the same thing, tuck down in there. That's a nice compact looking unit. It travels like that, in the safe like that, all those bits and pieces, so very nice on that score. Leg deployment, nice simple thing, nice solid lockdowns. They have an anti-twist thing to be able to sit down the bottom there, but nice and easy to use. Simple button to push on the side here, slides up and down, nice and simple. Same deal with the free play, as you saw us moving that, but that free play, nice from preload to shot. You really do have nice control. Once you get it shooting properly, this is a muzzle brake that I have built myself. I've ended up where I do run some vents, run some ports in the top of this one to make this rifle shoot nicely. Lots of things to get this thing to shoot flat. I have made it do it. You see the last videos with it. It shoots and cycles very, very well. The other feature about this, moving into a heavier caliber rifle, is the style of the feet. We have some little claws underneath here. So we have a skid and some nice little claws. And we use that. You want to use this on the bonnet of your car or something like this, it's going to rip holes in the bonnet of your car. It's trying to dig into it. They are quite flat and quite low, so it's just a little bit of carpet like this it's actually sitting into, but I wouldn't try and shoot it on that. One of the features about this style of foot, which is what I have on basically the 3 of my Magnum rifles, running this style of bipod because I like the look of it, I like how high it runs, I like the bits and pieces. Once I make my little mod, I like how that works very much so. But essentially is how you use this foot. I've, from the early days, went from shooting in the middle of my roll, my mat, where there's a bit of padding and a bit of cushioning, and sit them down there. I found that as a negative. Really, these I use under nothing more than a single bit of canvas or dead in the dirt. And the reason for that is the more they grip in, the more stability you get out of when it's dealing the recoil and it's cycling backwards. If you've got soft, squishy stuff under your feet, then there's other things the rifle's trying to do over that. So by having it firmly planted into the dirt, dug in properly, that means that it really does give that really nice cycle straight backwards and forwards when you're shooting like that. So it's essentially, this is, like I said, this is basically not modified apart from the little stop on there. Really nice the way, I like the way these bipods work. It's got the same feature of being high mounted, so you're getting quite a bit of extension. This does have a good lift out of it for shooting extreme range or getting on an angle where you've got an up elevation in your barrel. And once again, it's got that same short chassis. It's got that same modified bar on here, which I like to do, but it's got that fairly same short chassis to give you that elevation, plus reaching forward to adjust or mess with things is able to happen without having to scurry up to the front of the rifle. Okay, one more rifle and we'll go there and I'll see if I can tie it all up. Okay, so this is the last one of the bits and pieces. As you can see, this is a bit more of a behemoth of a rifle. This is my 375 Gibbs, or 375 Chi-Tac improved, which is essentially the real cartridge, or I should say, to explain that for people who don't understand, essentially the Gibbs, the 505 Gibbs is the parent case for a 408 Chi-Tac. They used the parent case, actually where the original design came from was the 505 Gibbs. They're not the same cases, they're not taking 505 Gibbs and necking them down, but it's where the parent case came from. Then the 375 is essentially a neck down 408. This is an improved case, which means it's changed the shoulders on the case, it's gone into a custom design, and for that reason I've given it a different name. And that is, I'm going back to the parent case. So that's why I call it 375 Gibbs. Back into the bipod conversation, this is largely a custom bipod. using bits and pieces and features that I like, but doing it my way for the extreme type I'm shooting, that I'm trying to do with this rifle. It is essentially the long leg Atlas legs with essentially the top piece of the actually where it mounts from, doing the same things as the other Atlas unit, where it has a button to press, it has the pull down to travel. Those bits are of the Atlas and are Atlas. The quick release system, which is in a different form, actually clips to a rail on the front of the rifle, and that's given me where I've got that up nice and high but still fitting there where it should do. It's got a very positive big lockdown system on the front of it, so it's made so it locks down there. I've custom made this aluminium front frame that has all this in to give me those features. I've also custom modified all these bits and pieces here to get it running in the angle where it does, so it has the quick release system. I have a smaller bipod that can come off here. This essentially I won't pull it right off, but that does swing down and release that bipod off the front there, and I have a smaller bench unit if I wanted to do that. And I've made the custom feet. You'll see the feet are of a similar design. We'll flick it up a little bit, and I'll just move that forward so the camera can see. But essentially, they are of a similar design with the skid, with a decent sort of dig-in point we've got here, so it can really bed itself both in grip for lateral grip, for forward and rear grip, and dig down to the dirt. This one, because of the extreme length shot I'm doing with this, and I'm doing it in the dry, I have it set up with a scope on a big angle. Means I'm actually looking through the barrel. Won't get complicated about that, but your light that goes through your lens comes from either side, so you can actually look through your muzzle brake if it's not too big. I do have a different shielded brake that's quite a bit wider, which stops the dust from coming up, but with this one, which I need for my extreme shot, there's dust goes everywhere. So I ran a ground sheet in front, and I actually push this down on top of the ground sheet and dig it into the dirt. So I actually work them in properly, either leg in properly into the ground before I start shooting. That travel, which is why I've designed this whole thing, is exactly, we'll move it back to where it's got a little bit of grip. These are sitting up on that. They're made to be dug into the dirt. But that travel I'm talking about, same feature. We've got a nice forward and back movement. A bit hard to load it on here, but there's a decent amount of movement in these legs to let that actually happen. I'll show it a bit more like that, a bit easier. So rocks backwards and forwards. Of course, when I'm doing my extreme shot, we're up in these sorts of heights. So then you'll see more easily what it's actually doing in the way of it's got its forward and back travel, and that is something that really does give us nice control over how the rifle shoots. Put these away, sitting up there. Essentially the features that this bipod ends up with, like some of the other bipods, are very much designed to shoot the rifle. And as an overall, what I'm trying to get out of all bipods, I want them to make the shooting, to not detract from the rifle shooting at all, and to be a part of making the rifle shoot better. To do that, that straight cycle, straight forward and back, is a very important feature on getting them to shoot well. The being grounded and being planted on some form or other tends to help the rifle jump. In the way of when you've got rifles that do bounce around and kick back, and something like this is ultimately going to do that. With 150 grains of powder shooting 400 grain bullets, you've got a fair bit of a whack going on. But the truth of it is, even when you're shooting a 75 grain bullet with 25 grains of powder, you can still have a jump and a skip going on. The features I've mentioned about how to make sure that you're getting the bipod feet grounded, about having the free play, are all about trying to make sure that the rifle shoots well. Part of the diagnosis, there's obviously the theory. Like I said, I like to get them mechanically, aesthetically pleasing is where I like to go anyway. It's what I like a rifle to look like. But ultimately what we're talking about is that when you shoot, the rifle comes straight back and goes straight forward again. If it doesn't, the bipod might not be the problem, but the bipod is key to this. One of the things I will say for the prone shooters with heavier calibers, a real feature a simple thing that can be part of what you're doing is simply what you've got under your bipod. You know, the likes of the spikes, they're like I said, doing them for the Harris as well now. You have them for the Atlas. The likes of spikes where you can dig into the ground do tend to absorb some of that shock, so that can stop a jump by itself. The truth of it is, if it's jumping and spikes fix it, good, but it isn't all the problem is. There's something else going on causing that drop, that jump. So the spikes will help absorb it, but I would suggest I'd always try and fix both sides of it. Something fixes it great, it shoots really good, you're down at a quarter MOA, okay, leave it alone. In the world of, you can't see it jumping, but I watched a video the other day where, although the rifle didn't actually jump, if you watch carefully, you could see the barrel was doing a proper hum in the front of it. It wasn't a cycle, it was a proper hum in the front of it. That tells me that although what he had set up was working well for not making it jump, there was still other things going on. So that may be a bipod, that may be your buttstock, that may be the muzzle brake, that may be the chassis, that may be all sorts of things, but these are all part of the clues to try and help. So anyway, that's enough of my babble about bipods. I hope that helps in some form or other. It's really trying to help answer the questions that I'm getting in various ways, from YouTube to Facebook to you name it. And listen, like I said, I hope it helps. Thanks very much for checking us out, and we'll catch you next time.